Growing up in Searcy, we had the most magnificent fig tree in our backyard. In fact, now that we're back in Arkansas, I've got this master plan of one of these days, maybe this summer when I'm around, going down to Searcy and knocking on the door of my childhood home and asking the current residents if I could have a clipping from the fig tree so that I could, plant it and see if we could get a fig tree growing here in Rogers. Obviously, different growing zones. Well, we'll see if it all works out. Is that an invasion of their privacy? Maybe so. We used to do this a lot for people, though. With this particular fig tree, all kinds of church members and my mom's co-workers, they'd come over and they'd get clippings. And so this fig tree has propagated all over Searcy, Arkansas. And what a magnificent tree it was. If you've never tasted a fig, first of all, they're probably the best fruit, right? Unless of course you don't like that kind of seedy, crunchy texture that they have once you bite into them. But a perfectly ripe fig, there's nothing quite like it. In fact, this fig tree was on the very back corner of our property, and it was just in the right section where it lined up against our neighbors on three different lots, all backed up to this fig tree. It was maybe 30 feet tall. We couldn't even reach the top of this fig tree with our tallest ladder. I don't know if we ever were able to pick all of the figs off of this thing when it was fully in season. We had one neighbor who was actually an elder at one of the local churches. He was able to get all the figs that grew over his side of the fence, and then his next door neighbor, they were able to stay in well supply of figs, our neighbors on the other side, and then we'd still fill up a 5-gallon bucket once or twice a week and take these things to friends and family members at church. This fig tree was so incredibly prosperous that one year, something had gone wrong. Maybe we'd gotten a late frost or not enough rain, I can't remember. One year it didn't produce any. It was tragic. We were so disappointed. And it affected a lot of people because we were all used to getting those figs. It was especially sad to look out there and see our favorite feature of the property barren. Well, it's quite similar, in fact, to the text that we're going to look at today. This is Mark chapter 11. The story also occurs in Matthew 21. Luke tells a parable of a barren fig tree, and John doesn't include it at all. I'm going to read from Mark's account of this particular story today, Mark chapter 11, where Jesus, after having come and found the temple in shambles, right, full of people, plenty of hubbub, but for the wrong reasons. Jesus, in Mark's gospel, before coming to the temple, first has found the fig tree and found it in this particular state. It's in Mark's gospel where we find that this story is sandwiched around the triumphal, around the temple, that is, where Jesus curses the fig tree. And then they come back by the fig tree to find that it's withered. Got a little bit confused there because in Matthew's gospel it's switched. The fig tree is in the middle of the sandwich instead of on the outside, right? So in Mark chapter 11, it's connected to the cleansing of the temple. Jesus, of course, has come on the way into the temple. This is verse 12 of Mark chapter 11. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. It's from there that he goes to the temple, which we talked about yesterday. After they've returned to Bethany, returning into Jerusalem for the second day, verse 20. And they passed by in the morning. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." And Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive your trespasses. Jesus follows up the lesson of the fig tree with a parable about faithful prayer. I'm not going to get into that as much today for the time that we have, though it's certainly worthy of consideration. The fact of the matter is, in this particular stage of Jesus' ministry, the temple comes into the forefront, doesn't it? The temple is such a key figure in this last stage of Jesus' ministry. Jesus is going to pronounce judgment upon the temple, which we're going to get to in a day or two. It's here where Jesus sees the fig tree as a metaphor for what's happened at the temple. You see, God had these grand plans for Israel, didn't he? He planted Israel in a fertile land. He gave his people prime real estate so that the whole world might pass through ancient Israel and hear and see about the God who has given the people the land. It's in Genesis 12 where God gives Abraham this promise for what will become of his grand family. And the intention there in Genesis 12:2 is, I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Making one man's family prosperous is one thing, but changing the world through this lineage is an entirely different thing, isn't it? See, the fact of the matter is, now that all this has come to pass, God has pronounced judgment on Israel's fruitlessness. There's no way to read the story of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection biblically that doesn't take into account God's history with Israel. See, Jesus is redeeming and renewing Israel, but in order to get there, he pronounces judgment first. Brothers and sisters, today the lesson is not just that we would take a lesson from Israel's history and their barrenness, their fruitlessness, and to say, well, they sure did mess up, didn't they? Instead, we've got to look at our own lives, don't we? We examine our own fruitfulness or lack thereof. See, it's in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus says, by your fruit you will know them. What about us? What will people say about us? What do they see in us? You see, God's people weren't living up to their intention, and so they're uprooted. And I guess kind of mixing metaphors here, we then, according to Romans, are grafted in. And what a blessing it is to be grafted in to the family of God. May we never take that for granted. May we examine our own fruit today and this week and every day thereafter. See, it's not so different for us. The question is, are we bearing fruit? This, of course, signals the new creation, doesn't it? The fact that God has given us another chance, that the withering of the fig tree is not the end of the story, but God has instead brought a new tree to bloom, and it's blooming right now. You can take a look outside and see all of the blooming trees around and be reminded of the fact that God has given new life in the face of faithlessness. Will we be faithful today? God bless. Talk to you tomorrow.